Hello students, once again I welcome you here in my YouTube channel, and in this video lecture I am going to cover History first chapter for NCERT class 10, India and the Contemporary World 2, and the name of the chapter is Rise of Nationalism in Europe. Students, the term nationalism is similar to the term patriotism. However, we must know that there is not one rigid meaning of nationalism. We shall look at this very interesting topic by reading about the rise of nationalism in Europe. We will learn how there were several phases of nationalism and how each phase added a different meaning to the word. Dear friends, here I am going to display a video that would be very interesting, so I urge everybody to watch the video well and enjoy. Thank you.
The French Revolution in 1789 activated the concept of nationalism. Power was transferred from monarchy to a body of French citizens. People became central to shaping the future of the country. Developing a sense of nationalism was a long process. French revolutionaries introduced many practices to develop amongst the poor a sense of collective identity. Some of these practices were the ideas of la patrie, or the fatherland, and les citoyens, or the citizen, stated that all citizens were equal. They introduced the new tricolour flag. The Estates General was now called the National Assembly and had elected members. In the name of the nation, they composed new hymns, took oaths, and commemorated martyrs. A centralized administrative system formulated uniform laws for all. They abolished internal custom duties, and a uniform system of weights and measures was adopted to ease trade throughout France. French, which was spoken in Paris, became the national language of the country. Due to such activities, the idea of nationalism started to spread all over Europe 1790 onwards.
The early 18th and 19th centuries in Europe saw the fall of autocratic multi-regional monarchies and the rise of the modern nation-state. It was a tumultuous transformation guided by three main ideologies: liberalism, conservatism, and nationalism. Let's take a quick look at what each of these ideologies represented at that time in Europe. The word liberalism is derived from the Latin word liber, which means free. Liberals usually belonged to the educated middle class. They campaigned for freedom and equality for all people. They believed that all people should have freedom of speech, thought, expression, religion, assembly, and association, among other things. Politically, liberals sought two things: one, government by consent or elected government; two, the right to vote for all men, irrespective of class. Women's suffrage was a separate movement entirely. In economic terms, liberals sought the right to own property for all people. Remember, until now, property was controlled by the upper class of society. Liberalism stood for abolition of privileges by birth. the liberals also fought for free markets. They sought removal of state restrictions on the production and movement of goods within a unified territory. Thus, many liberals became liberal nationalists. That is, they began to seek the formation of a unified territory or nation in which liberal ideals could be implemented. Conservatives in general were people who did not want change. These people wanted to retain traditional beliefs and institutions such as monarchy, nobility, and church. Not surprisingly, most conservatives belonged to these institutions themselves. Conservatives sought to crush all opposition to autocratic monarchy. They enforced censorship on everything from newspapers to art. Books, songs, plays, and other forms of expressions were banned from reflecting ideas like liberty and equality. Conservatists wanted people to forget all that the French Revolution had inspired them to do. The idea of nationalism was an offshoot of the idea of liberty. In France, as well as in most regimes across Europe, the dream of a nation began as a revolt against autocratic monarchy. Revolutionaries rallied people around the concept of a united community with a shared cultural identity and equal rights under law. Nationalism evolved as the desire of people who spoke the same language, shared the same culture, and had the same ancestry to belong to one unified territory or nation. Romantic artists and poets of the time shaped and celebrated nationalism through the use of nationalist art, music, poetry, and dance. Language was another defining element of nationalism. In France, for example, regional dialects were discouraged in favor of a standard form of French as spoken in Paris. By the late 19th century, however, nationalism was no longer about identity and democracy. European nationalism now began to manifest as a quest for dominion over other regions. The quest for dominion in the Balkan region was particularly intense and eventually led to the First World War. Thus we see that nationalism meant different things to different people at different times. Yet, by the end of the 19th century, the idea that society must be divided into nations was universally accepted.
What is revolution? It is a forcible overthrow of the existing government in favor of a new one. The period between 1830 and 1843 was marked by a number of revolutions in Europe. These were led by the liberal nationalists, which included the elite and educated middle class, such as professors, school teachers, clerks, and others. The July Revolution of 1830 in France led to the installation of a constitutional monarchy with King Louis Philippe as the head. This sparked an uprising in Brussels, which led to Belgium breaking away from Netherlands. This was followed by the Greek War of Independence, which began in 1821. the Greek educated classes no longer wanted to be a part of the Ottoman Empire. Many in Western Europe sympathized with the Greek culture, as it was the cradle of the European civilization. After a long struggle, Greece became an independent nation in 1832. There were many factors that led to the development of nationalist sentiments, translating into demand for states in other parts of Europe. These were cultural, political, and economic in nature. Let's see the role played by each. The Revolution of 1848 in France was led by the middle class and supported by the hungry peasants and farmers too. This filtered to the Austro-Hungarian Empire made up of Germany, Italy and Poland. As popular unrest grew in these countries, each demanded for a nation-state, with parliamentary principles like Constitution, freedom of press, and association. In Germany, political associations comprising of middle-class professionals, businessmen, and artists came to Frankfurt to vote for an all-German National Assembly. However, this initial attempt of the elected parliament was not successful. Although the movement was liberal in nature, the issue of women's political rights was controversial. Women had participated in the liberal movement, formed political associations, founded newspapers, and had been a part of meetings and demonstrations. Yet, they were not given the right to vote. In Germany, when the new parliament was elected, women were only allowed as observers. Culture also played an important part in developing the nationalist sentiments. Romantic artists and poets used art, poetry, stories, and music to focus on emotions, intuitions, and mystic feelings to develop feelings of shared heritage and a common past. Like Delacroix, the dramatist was able to appeal to the emotions when he dramatized the incident of the killing of 20,000 Greeks by Turks. The English poet Lord Byron organized funds and later went to fight in the Greek War. According to the German philosopher Johann Gottfried, true German culture was to be found in the common people. Folk songs, folk dance, and folk poetry were popularized. Similarly, language also was used as a weapon to rebel against the existing systems. For example, Russian was imposed in Polish schools and people were forced to use it. The Polish people rose in revolt, but the armed rebellion against Russians in 1831 was crushed. Yet the Polish people, the priests and bishops used their language as a symbol of struggle against Russian dominance. The Revolution of 1848 in France was led by the middle class and supported by the hungry peasants and farmers too. This filtered to the Austro-Hungarian Empire made up of Germany, Italy and Poland. As popular unrest grew in these countries, each demanded for a nation-state, with parliamentary principles like Constitution, freedom of press, and association. In Germany, political associations comprising of middle-class professionals, businessmen and artists came to Frankfurt to vote for an all-German National Assembly. However, this initial attempt of the elected parliament was not successful. Although the movement was liberal in nature, the issue of women's political rights was controversial. Women had participated in the liberal movement, formed political associations, founded newspapers, and had been a part of meetings and demonstrations. Yet, they were not given the right to vote. In Germany, when the new parliament was elected, women were only allowed as observers. Let's see how economic conditions in Europe during 19th century helped develop nationalistic sentiments. During 19th century, the population in Europe increased in large numbers. This led to unemployment and migration of people from rural areas to urban areas where they lived in overcrowded slums. Due to industrialization, small producers in towns faced stiff competition from cheap machine-made goods from England. This was specially borne by textile production. In 1845, the weavers of Silesia also revolted against the contractors who paid them very less wages for the services rendered by them. In areas where aristocracy prevailed, peasants suffered under feudal lords. The rise in food price or bad harvest added misery to the already miserable life of the general public. In the year 1848, food shortage and unemployment brought the population of Paris on the road to revolt. This revolt eventually resulted in the National Assembly proclaiming France to be a republic. Over the course of time, these nationalist sentiments spread all over the world. Countries in Asia and Africa based their freedom struggle on the principles of the French Revolution.
When a shrewd politician called Otto von Bismarck became the chief minister of Prussia in 1862, the spirit of nationalism had long been brewing in the German states. The ideals of liberty and equality that fueled the French Revolution had begun to inspire other people across Europe. In 1834, a customs union formed by Prussia and other German states abolished trade and tariff barriers across 39 German states and standardized currency. Thus, a sense of economic nationalism was beginning to strengthen nationalist sentiments. Culturally too, Romantic poets and writers were beginning to use German folk stories and folk art to define national identity. By 1848, men and women of the liberal middle classes began to demand a nation-state based on parliamentary principles such as an elected constitution, freedom of press, and freedom of association. On May 18, 1848, over 800 elected representatives of the Frankfurt Parliament drafted the constitution for a German nation in which monarchy would be subject to the Parliament. While this Parliament didn't last, the liberal nationalist sentiments of the German states kept growing. It was in these circumstances that in 1862, Otto von Bismarck became the chief minister of Prussia. In the years that followed, Bismarck used war, tact, and treachery to strengthen Prussian power. Unification of the German states was part of his plan. In 1863, the King of Denmark annexed the disputed duchies of Schleswig and Holstein. The people of Prussia felt that these German-speaking duchies rightfully belonged with them. Bismarck gave the Danish an ultimatum to let go of the territories. When the Danish king refused, Bismarck acquired the support of Austria, and together they defeated Denmark in 1864. Thus, Denmark was forced to cede both duchies. As per a signed agreement between Austria and Germany in 1865, Schleswig went to Prussia and Holstein was given to Austria. Austria, however, was unhappy with this settlement that gave the control of Schleswig to Prussia. In 1866, Austria asked for a renewed arrangement for the two duchies. Aware of a possible clash, Bismarck sought military help from Italy. He also sought neutrality from France in case of war with Austria. The Austro-Prussia War of 1866 at Sadowa ended in another significant victory for Prussia. The two duchies of Schleswig and Holstein, among other areas, were returned to Prussia, and Austria was excluded from the German political system. At this point, some states in the north united to form the North German Confederation. Bismarck's next strategy was to alienate and incite the French into war, so that the various German states would unite with Prussia in nationalistic fervor. The French Emperor Napoleon III had begun to realize that they did not derive any real gains from agreements with Prussia. Bismarck now provoked France by offering the vacant throne of Spain to Prince Leopold, a relative of the Prussian king. Bismarck also tactfully altered the contents of a royal telegram to give both the French and the Germans an impression that their respective ambassadors were insulted. Soon, France and Prussia were at war. The South German states joined Prussia in the war against France. Once again, Prussia won. Under the Treaty of Frankfurt, France lost Alsace and a part of Lorraine to Prussia, apart from paying £200 million as war indemnity. On 18th January 1871, at the Hall of Mirrors, Versailles, King William I of Prussia was crowned Emperor of United Germany. Thus, with diplomacy, shrewdness, iron will, and strategy, Bismarck achieved the unification of Germany. The unification of Italy in the 12 years spanning 1859 to 1870 was largely a military achievement. Yet, Italian revolutionaries had been spreading ideas of freedom for a long time before that. As early as 1830s, a prominent Italian revolutionary called Giuseppe Mazzini had started a secret society called Young Italy. The aim of Young Italy was to liberate Italian states from foreign rule and unite them into a free and independent republic. Many uprisings were also attempted by the Carbonari, or secret societies that were spread across Italian states. These uprisings failed, but the idea of nationalism was kept alive. In the year 1858, Italy was yet divided in several states. Lombardy and Venetia were under the Austrian Habsburg Empire. The Pope ruled most central states, and the kingdom of both Sicilies was under the Spanish kings. Sardinia-Piedmont was the only state ruled by an Italian princely house. Thus, hopes of unification of Italy lay with King Victor Emmanuel II of Sardinia-Piedmont. King Victor's chief strength was a highly able minister called Cavour, who led to the efforts for unification of Italy. Cavour first worked out a diplomatic alliance with King Napoleon III of France, and together they defeated Austria in war in 1859. As a result, Austria gave up the Italian state of Lombardy. Soon after, some of the small northern states also revolted and joined Sardinia. Cavour was helped by a significant military leader called Giuseppe Garibaldi, who rallied with a force of 1,000 revolutionary men, marched into the kingdom of both Sicilies, won the support of local peasants, and drove out the Spanish kings. Thus, by 1860, the unification had spread to South Italy. In 1861, Victor Emmanuel II was proclaimed King of United Italy. Soon, the Papal States of Central Italy revolted against the Pope and joined the new Kingdom of Italy. Only Venice and Rome remained under Austrian and French control respectively. In 1866, when Prussia defeated Austria, Venice joined Italy. In 1870, when Prussia attacked France, the French withdrew their troops from Rome and Italy occupied it. Finally, the unification of Italy was complete. While Cavour was no longer alive to see it, Mazzini was disappointed that it was united as a kingdom and not as an independent republic.
We come across portraits and statues of rulers and leaders all over the world. It's easy to show the physical image, but difficult to represent an abstract concept such as a country physically. As the concept of nationalism took shape, the need to give the country a physical form was also felt. Hence, in the 18th and 19th century, artists personified the country or showed the country as a person. Nations came to be represented with a female figure. The female figure used was not related to anybody in real life, but it gave a concrete form to the abstract idea of a nation. Many countries began to use female allegories. During the French Revolution, artists used the female allegory Marianne to represent France as a people's nation. She characterized the tenets of the French Revolution. It had the red cap, the tricolor, and the cockade as symbols of liberty and republic. Statues of Marianne were erected in public places, and images were marked on coins and stamps. The purpose was to remind people to be united and identify with the nation. Similarly, Germania was the allegorical representation of Germany, wearing a crown of oak leaves which symbolizes heroism. However, with the passage of time, towards the last quarter of 19th century, nationalism lost the idealistic, liberal and democratic sentiment which had been an essential part of it. Nationalism started becoming limited to a small group of people who had some specific limited needs in mind. The nationalist groups became intolerant of each other and were always ready to fight. The people in power in Europe manipulated the nationalist sentiments of the countrymen to further their imperialistic ends. This led to a state of nationalist tension in Europe. Let's have a look at one such case. In the 19th century, the countries colonized by European powers started opposing imperial domination. The nationalist movements struggled to form independent nation-states and had a sense of collective national unity. This struggle was also a fight against imperialism. Places which sought to become nation-states did not copy the nationalism followed in Europe, but instead, specific variety of nationalism was developed among different nations based on their needs. The outcome of these struggles was that the people and the idea of societies being organized into nation-states began to be accepted naturally and universally.